I found the truth. I wish I hadn't. That was the first thought that crossed my mind as my phone buzzed in my hand, the screen lighting up the darkness around me. I was standing alone, the night air cold against my skin, and in that moment, I understood something terrible. Some truths don't bring peace. Some truths don't bring justice. Some truths ruin you quietly and permanently. If you've ever believed that digging deep enough will always lead to closure, if you've ever thought the truth guarantees justice, then stop right here. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me. Because this story isn't about winning. It's about what happens when you uncover something that should have stayed buried. Ravenswood looked like the kind of town where nothing bad ever happened. White fences. Familiar faces. Streets where people waved at each other out of habit. But beneath that calm surface was a silence that had lasted nearly 3 decades. A silence shaped like a missing girl. Emily Carter disappeared on an autumn night in 1995. She was 17 years old. Smart, kind, dependable. The kind of girl people still described as perfect long after she vanished. She left a friend's house just before 10, promising to call when she got home. She never did. There were searches. Vigils. Flyers stapled to telephone poles. Police cars crawling down back roads and flashlights cutting through the woods. Then weeks passed. Then months. Then years. Eventually, Ravenswood did what small towns always do when they can't fix something. It learned how to live with it. I didn't come to Ravenswood for Emily Carter. At least, that's what I told myself. I was a journalist burned out by the city, by deadlines, by noise. Ravenswood was supposed to be quiet. Cheap rent. Slow days. A place to write, but once you know where to look, the town practically whispered her name. Old newspaper clippings. A dusty box in the library archives. A missing person's photo that had yellowed with time. The case had never been solved. No arrests. No bodies. No answers. And that kind of case has a way of pulling at people like me. I started asking questions. Most people smiled politely and changed the subject. Others told me I was wasting my time. A few warned me, softly, carefully, that some things were better left alone. That was when I first heard the name Thomas Richardson. He lived on the outskirts of town, near the quarry. People described him the same way every time. Quiet. Reclusive. Odd. The kind of man you notice without ever really seeing. I knocked on his door expecting resistance. Instead, he invited me in. He told me he had seen Emily the night she disappeared. Walking alone. Cold air. Her arms folded tightly against herself. He said he'd offered her a ride. She refused. He said he watched her walk down the road until a dark sedan slowed beside her. Then it drove away. No license plate. No face. Just movement. The way he spoke was calm. Too calm. Like someone who had repeated the story many times in his head. I wanted to dismiss him. But pieces of his account lined up with old witness statements. The timeline matched. The location fit. And once I started pulling at that thread, everything else began to unravel. Emily's father, James Carter, wasn't the grieving, broken man the town remembered. Buried in old financial records were signs of embezzlement, money laundering, shell companies that vanished overnight. He'd been investigated once, briefly, in the 90s. Cleared. Untouchable. Until I found something I wasn't supposed to see. An old forum post. Archived. Forgotten. EC, October 15, 95. It was an accident. JC. My hands shook as I read it again and again. Initials don't lie. People do. When I confronted James Carter, he didn't deny it for long. He broke. He told me Emily had discovered his illegal dealings. She threatened to expose him. They argued. She fell. He panicked. And just when I thought the story was over, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Meet me at the old warehouse at midnight if you want the truth. That was when I realized I hadn't uncovered the ending. I had only reached the point of no return. I should have gone to the police after that message. That's what a responsible journalist would have done. That's what a rational person would have done. But once you've spent years chasing the truth, there's a part of you that believes you're immune to consequences. You start thinking of yourself as an observer, not a participant. So I went alone. Midnight in Ravenswood feels heavier than normal darkness. The streets empty out early, and the silence presses in, thick and watchful. The old warehouse sat near the river, abandoned since the mill shut down years ago. Its windows were black, its walls scarred by time and graffiti, the air around it smelling of rust and damp wood. My car door echoed too loudly when I closed it. That should have been another warning. Inside, the warehouse was colder than the night outside. My footsteps scraped against concrete as I moved forward, my phone flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. Every sound felt amplified, my breathing, the thud of my heartbeat, the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. Then I saw him. Thomas Richardson stepped into the light as if he'd been waiting just beyond it the entire time. He didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, he looked relieved. "I told you the truth," he said quietly. His voice echoed off the walls, and something about the way he spoke made my stomach tighten. It wasn't fear in his tone. It was certainty. But not all of it. I asked him why he'd messaged me. Why now? Why here? He smiled, and that smile didn't reach his eyes. Because he was tired, he said. Tired of carrying it alone. Tired of watching the town pretend nothing happened. Tired of knowing that everyone thought his father was a monster, when the real one was standing right in front of them. That was the moment my mind started to lag behind reality. My father? I repeated. Richardson nodded slowly. James Carter. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced around in my head, refusing to settle. I told him that was impossible. That James Carter's son had died years ago in an accident. That's what the town believed. That's what he needed them to believe, Richardson said. Then he told me everything. James Carter had another son. A secret son. One he'd hidden away after an affair threatened his reputation. Thomas Richardson wasn't a drifter who chose isolation. He was a man erased by design. On the night Emily disappeared, Thomas had been driving the dark sedan. He said it plainly. No drama. No hesitation. Emily hadn't recognized him when he pulled alongside her. She didn't need to. She trusted the name Carter. Everyone did. When she leaned closer to hear him over the engine, he panicked. She knew too much. She was going to talk. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said. None of it was. When he finished, the silence between us felt unbearable. My phone trembled in my hand, not from vibration, but from how badly I was shaking. You can't prove it, he said, almost gently. That's why I chose you. You'll understand. I didn't understand. I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me, like reality itself had tilted slightly off-center. This wasn't justice. This wasn't closure. This was a confession with no witnesses, no recording, and no evidence. He stepped back into the shadows, leaving me alone with the truth and the realization that it meant nothing. As I stumbled out of the warehouse, the night air hit me like a wave. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't think straight. All I could hear was his voice, repeating the same sentence over and over. You'll never be able to prove it. He was right. The police wouldn't reopen the case without physical evidence. A secret son who legally didn't exist was a dead end. A confession made in private was just a story. And stories don't put people in prison. Over the next few days, the paranoia set in. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. A car idling too long across the street. Footsteps that seemed to stop when I turned around. The feeling that someone was always just outside my line of sight. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face. Not from photos, but imagined. A moment frozen in time, just before everything went wrong. I tried writing the article. I couldn't. Every sentence felt dangerous. Every word felt like an invitation for something terrible to happen. And then James Carter died. A heart attack, they said. Quiet. Sudden. Peaceful. The town mourned. Praised his generosity. Spoke of tragedy. No one mentioned Emily. Thomas Richardson vanished shortly after. His house sat empty, windows broken, mailbox overflowing. Just another abandoned place in a town full of them. The case remained cold. And I was left with something far worse than unanswered questions. I was left with the truth, and nowhere to put it. After James Carter's funeral, Ravenswood exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the town had been holding its breath for decades and finally decided it was safe to breathe again. People spoke kindly of him. They talked about donations, community events, and how hard his life had been. They didn't talk about his daughter. They didn't talk about 1995. They never did. I watched the funeral from across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of my car. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Standing among people who believed in a lie felt unbearable. The casket disappeared into the ground, and with it, any chance of official justice. I realized something terrifying that day. The truth doesn't matter if no one is willing to hear it. I tried to leave Ravenswood after that. I packed my bags more than once. Every time, something stopped me. A sense of unfinished business. Or maybe fear. Fear that if I left, everything I'd uncovered would dissolve into nothing more than a nightmare I once had. I started documenting everything privately. Dates. Names. Conversations. I recorded my memories of the warehouse meeting in detail, even though I knew it wouldn't hold up legally. I backed everything up in multiple places. If something happened to me, at least the story would exist somewhere. That decision may have saved me. Or doomed me. Because the more I wrote, the worse the feeling became. The sense of being watched wasn't paranoia anymore. It was pattern. A car followed me home one evening, keeping just enough distance to pretend it wasn't. My mailbox was opened more than once. Nothing taken. Just opened. A message appeared on my phone late one night. No number. No name. Some stories destroy the people who tell them. I didn't sleep at all that night. Thomas Richardson was gone. Officially, no one cared. Unofficially, people noticed. Someone like him doesn't just disappear without leaving a trace. But the town treated it like a relief. One less strange man on the outskirts. One less reminder. I tried tracking him down anyway. Old records. Birth certificates. Anything connecting him to James Carter. It was like chasing a ghost. Whatever paper trail once existed had been scrubbed clean. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just one man covering for his son. This was a system quietly protecting itself. Police officers who had retired. Judges who'd moved on. Bank managers who had signed papers without asking questions. Everyone had played a small role, and small roles are the hardest to expose. Emily Carter hadn't just disappeared. She had been erased. The guilt started to creep in next. Not survivor's guilt, witness guilt. I knew what happened. I knew who did it. And I was doing nothing. I told myself I was being careful. That I needed proof. That going public without evidence would only make things worse. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I was afraid. One evening, I found my apartment door slightly open. Just a crack. Nothing inside was disturbed. My laptop was still there. My notes untouched. But the message was clear. We can reach you. I locked the door and slid down against it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. That was the first time I cried since the warehouse. Not because I was scared, but because I finally understood what this story had taken from me. Peace. I started dreaming about Emily. Not as a ghost. Not screaming. Just standing there, watching me. Waiting. As if asking why I hadn't done anything yet. And then something unexpected happened. I received an envelope. No return address. No stamp. It had been slid under my door. Inside was a single photograph. A dark sedan. Parked near the quarry. Dated October 15, 1995. And written on the back, in shaky handwriting. You were never meant to see this. That's when I knew this wasn't over. Not for me. Not for them. And definitely not for Emily. I stared at that photograph for a long time before I understood what it meant. It wasn't just proof. It wasn't just evidence that someone out there still knew what happened. It was a warning. Someone had kept this photo hidden for nearly 30 years, and now they were reminding me that I was not in control of this story. I burned the envelope that night. Not because I wanted to destroy evidence, but because I wanted to send a message back. If they were watching me, I wanted them to know I wasn't frozen in fear. The paper curled into ash in my sink, the smell of smoke lingering long after the flames died. That was a mistake. The next morning, my car wouldn't start. The hood was closed. No broken windows. No obvious damage. Just silence when I turned the key. I called a mechanic. He said the wiring had been deliberately cut. Cleanly. Professionally. That's when the fear stopped being abstract. Someone wanted me stuck. I stopped leaving my apartment unless absolutely necessary. I ordered groceries. I worked with the blinds closed. Every knock at the door sent my pulse racing. Every unfamiliar sound felt deliberate. Then the calls started. No one spoke on the other end. Just breathing. Slow. Patient. As if they wanted me to know they had time. I recorded one of the calls. When I played it back, my stomach dropped. There was a second breath underneath the first. Someone else was there, listening. I took that recording to the police. They were polite. Sympathetic. Useless. No number. No trace. No crime. They told me to take a break. To step away from the case. To stop stirring up old pain. That's when I realized something crucial. They didn't think I was wrong. They thought I was inconvenient. I returned home that night to find my notes scattered across the floor. Not stolen. Not destroyed. Just spread out, like someone had read them carefully and wanted me to know it. One page was missing. The one where I'd written Thomas Richardson's real name. That night, I finally understood the full shape of the trap. If I published the story, I would be discredited. Called obsessed. Sued into silence. And if I kept quiet, the pressure wouldn't stop. It would just tighten slowly until I broke. They didn't need to kill me. They just needed to erase me. I sat on the floor until sunrise, replaying every conversation, every warning I'd ignored. Emily had threatened to expose James Carter, and it had cost her everything. Now I was standing in the same place she had, decades later, holding the same truth, and the outcome was shaping up the same way. I considered walking away completely. Leaving Ravenswood. Changing my name. Letting the story die. But then I thought about Emily's last walk home. About how alone she must have felt when that car slowed beside her. About how she never got the chance to choose silence. So I made a decision. If they were going to stop me, they'd have to do it in the open. I prepared one final file. A sealed package. Copies of everything I had, notes, recordings, timelines, the photograph I memorized before burning the envelope. I scheduled it to be sent automatically if anything happened to me. Then I wrote the story. Not for the police. Not for the courts. For the public. The night before I planned to publish, my phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. You don't know when to stop. I typed back before I could talk myself out of it. You already tried. The reply came almost instantly. Then you know what happens next. I slept with the lights on. At dawn, I opened my laptop, hands steady despite everything, and hovered my finger over the button that would send the truth into the world. And that's when I heard the knock. The knock came again, slower this time. Not aggressive. Not urgent. Confident. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at the door, every instinct in my body screaming that once I opened it, there would be no going back. My laptop sat open on the table beside me, the story ready, my fingers still hovering over the button that would release everything. The knock stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Check your email. I didn't want to. I already knew whatever waited there was meant to break me. But curiosity has always been my worst flaw, and it's the reason Emily Carter was dead. The email contained a single video file. No message. No explanation. I pressed play. The footage was grainy, time-stamped October 15, 1995. A fixed camera angle. A stretch of road near the quarry. The dark sedan rolled into frame and slowed. A girl stepped closer. The video cut off before anything explicit happened, but it didn't need to show more. I recognized the location. I recognized the car. And then the camera shifted slightly, just enough to catch a reflection in the driver's side window. A face. Thomas Richardson. My hands went numb. This was it. This was proof. Not enough for a conviction, maybe, but enough to force questions. Enough to shatter the lie Ravenswood had lived with for decades. Another knock echoed through the apartment. I know you're in there, a man's voice said calmly through the door. Not Thomas. Older. Familiar. James Carter had been buried weeks ago. But his voice hadn't been. You can't win this, the voice continued. You can only decide how badly you lose. That's when I understood the final truth. James Carter hadn't acted alone. He never had. I didn't open the door. Instead, I pressed publish. The article went live across multiple platforms at once, the scheduled files releasing automatically. Names. Timelines. Financial records. The video. Everything I had. I watched the page refresh, watched comments begin to pour in, watched the truth escape my hands and move into the world where it no longer belonged to me. The knocking turned into pounding. Then shouting. Then sirens. Someone else had called the police. By the time the door finally opened, it wasn't for him. It was for me. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect, and nothing like I imagined. The story exploded, then fractured. Some believed me. Others didn't. Lawsuits followed. Threats followed faster. The video disappeared from some platforms and resurfaced on others. Names were quietly removed from public office websites. A retired police chief moved out of state. No arrests were made. Officially, the Emily Carter case remains unsolved. Thomas Richardson was never found. Ravenswood didn't change. It never does. Towns like that don't heal. They adapt. They repaint. They rename buildings. They move on. I left not long after. New city. New apartment. New name on the mailbox. But the truth followed me. It always does. Some nights, I wake up convinced I hear knocking. Other nights, I dream of that road near the quarry, frozen in time, waiting for someone to do something different. I found the truth. I wish I hadn't. Because knowing didn't save Emily. It didn't bring justice. It didn't even bring peace. All it did was prove one terrible thing. Sometimes the truth isn't meant to set you free. Sometimes it's meant to remind you how powerless you really are. If this story stayed with you, if it made you uncomfortable, if it left you thinking long after it ended, then hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that live in the shadows between justice and silence. And tell me in the comments, do you believe the truth should always be exposed, no matter the cost? Or are some secrets better left buried? I'll see you in the next story.